Welcome to the Coaching Table. I'm Thomas Thompson, Executive Leadership Coach with Lead Self, Lead Others. And the Coaching Table is a weekly conversation I've created to help leaders like you talk about the things that you're not talking about, to ask you the questions that perhaps you're not asking yourself so that you can really lead yourself well and lead others well. And I'm really excited about today and about what we're going to talk about the next several times at the Coaching Table, because today we're going to talk about leading through listening. Now, many leaders may have just turned me off at that point, because as leaders, we don't like to listen. We like to tell, right? We have a message to share. We have a presentation to make. We have a conversational goal to get to. We have a vision to cast. And most of our chips are in the basket of telling, and very few make it to the basket of listening. But I believe I'm about to share a sentence with you that points to one of the most powerful practices we can use as a leader. And this works in our friendships, it works in our marriages, it works in our parenting, it works in the boardroom, it works in our own spiritual journey. It's a powerful sentence. In fact, I call it the leadership superpower. Here it is. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Now, you may recognize I didn't come up with that. Actually, a man named James came up with that. That's in James chapter 1, verse 19 from the Bible. It's 2,000 years old. James was a man who grew up as the half-brother of Jesus, watching his own brother grow and become this Messiah that he had long waited for. And so I believe that when James wrote his epistle, he wasn't just writing out of his own thoughts in mind. He was writing out of what he saw firsthand in his brother's life, the Son of God, Jesus Christ. So what was it that James saw in his brother's life that led him to really value being quick to listen? It's interesting, the more that I have read through the Gospels and followed Jesus, I kept coming up against this thought. Why does Jesus ask so many questions? He knows everything. He's all-knowing. He asks all questions all the time. In fact, somebody counted one time they had over 300 questions that Jesus asked people. And often they seem to be questions that seemed a little silly, right? Someone's on the ground and they're hurt or they're blind or they're lame since birth. And Jesus says, "What would you like me to do for you?" I wonder if the disciples were ever like, why doesn't Jesus just talk all the time? He's the expert. He's the leader. He's the one with something to say. Why does he ever want to hear us talk? And yet, time and again, Jesus asks questions of everyday knuckleheads like you and me, and then he sits back and he listens. Now, I used to think that Jesus asked questions just because he was just trying to lead a conversation. For example, like if you walk into your kitchen and on the ground is a broken cookie jar and there sits your little toddler, there's cookie crumbs all over his mouth, and you look down at him and you say, "Do you know what happened to the cookie jar?" You're not asking because you're genuinely curious. You're asking because you're trying to lead them to tell you the right answer. You already know what the answer is. But Jesus, when he asks questions, seems genuinely curious about the people around him. And it seemed this was a powerful way that he led people, through listening and good question asking. Could there be a connection between how powerfully Jesus spoke and how powerfully he listened? See, there's an order to James's word. He says everyone should be quick to listen, and then they can be slow to speak. Here's the leadership principle I want you to walk away with today. Being slow to speak will mean ending up saying less, but what you say will carry more power. You'll say less, but what you say will mean more. Being slow to speak begins to turn you into a communication surgeon. You wield your speech like a scalpel. Because when you've really listened, when you've really heard the other person, you can begin to eliminate the unnecessary and unhelpful things that you might say. I know this has happened to you. It's happened to me so many times where someone's talking and I start that switch of thinking how I'm going to respond when it's my turn. And if I pause and listen long enough, I realize, wait a minute, I'm beginning to formulate an answer to a question they're not asking. Or I'm about to respond to something they're not really saying. It's when I listen well that I understand. And that's really the thing. You know, when I coach other people, I've really had to come to a point where to realize the reason we listen is not just to listen. The reason we listen is not just to respond. The reason we listen is to understand. Because here's the point. God has been at work in this person across from us long before we ever showed up. As my mentor likes to say, we're late to the party. Listening well helps us truly understand what God is doing in this person and how we can best lead them in this moment. This is such a powerful topic for me that over the next few coaching tables, I want to dive into some very practical ways that you can become quick to listen and slow to speak. But today I want to give you something. Now I'm going to do something I've not done before, because normally at the end of a coaching table, I give you the coaching table question for this week. Today I just want to give you a coaching table exercise. Here's the exercise for this week. Pay attention to listening. Over the next week, I want you to be observant in conversations. How are other people listening to you? How are you listening to other people? When you're sitting at a team conversation, just pay attention. How well are people listening to one another? Really pay attention to listening. And I hope next week when I return with another coaching table topic around this subject, your pump will be a little bit primed, because you're going to come to this conclusion. I'll tell you ahead of time, spoiler alert, people don't listen well. Pay attention to listening and ask, what am I seeing about how I and those around me are listening? Listening is a leadership superpower. Get quick at it. I'll be back next week with a little bit more on this topic of listening and this conversation of how to improve your leadership through listening. But until then, you're always welcome at the coaching table.